Welcome to Cloudcast, where you get an inside look at St. Cloud, Florida's local government. Whether you live, work, or play here, we're bringing you the information you need to better understand your city. Cloudcast is hosted by our communications team, including Miriam Batchelder, Andrew Sullivan, Deborah Carson, and Jay B. Miller. Thanks for listening in to Cloudcast.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the award-winning Cloudcast, the City of St. Cloud's official podcast. My name is Andrew Sullivan, and I'm joined here by two experts in their fields. We'll go around the table and do some introductions. First, Cameron.
Hi, my name is Cameron Crandall. I'm the Deputy Public Works Director.
And Nolan.
I'm Nolan Ristow. I am the Emergency Manager.
Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me on Cloudcast today. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and that is preparedness for our upcoming hurricane season. As most people know, it begins in June, goes all the way through November, and with so many new folks that are in town, it's always good to kind of cover the basics. That's kind of what we're here to do today, just very conversationally, nothing too terribly specific if we can, but to get people ready so that there's a little less apprehension, a little less nervousness, and of course, just help save people and their property. So I guess I'd start off with the first question is, right now, what are some simple steps that we can take as homeowners, city residents, to be a little bit more ready?
Sure, yes. Step one is always to know your risk. So if you own a home here in the city, I'd always suggest looking up your flood zone. You can do that on the website here. Evaluate your, if you have an older home, how old's your roof? Do you have impact windows? That sort of thing. That way you can learn what your vulnerabilities are. That's a good place to start when you're looking at a plan. And
we certainly have a real mix of different styles of homes. We have very historic homes. We have some that were just built yesterday. So that's certainly something for people to evaluate as they get into this. I know, when I was younger, before Hurricane Andrew came across the state in South Florida, preparing for a storm was very different. It used to be you just tape some X's over your windows and call it a day. And things changed a lot since then. Now there's a whole changes to the building code. And, you hope that your more recently constructed homes are going to be a little bit more sturdy. But that's a good point. Cameron?
Yeah, Andrew really changed the name of the game, especially here in Florida. And a lot of the building codes changed because of the destruction we saw at Andrew. It's all about making a plan at this point. You want to start preparing before the the cone is over your house. You want to do it now. You want to start making your lists, getting your hurricane supplies ready. You don't want to go to Walmart 2 days before the hurricane's coming when everyone else is there and there's no water left on the shelves. Start getting your supplies ready now. Start learning your risk. Start understanding what you're going to need to do when the hurricane comes, because the hurricane may be coming.
And everybody's plan is going to be different, right? It is necessitated by, are you a caregiver for somebody? Do you have family? Do you have pets? I think a great resource for people to even just get started is to go to ready.gov, and you can start off. It'll figure out the list for you and kind of walk you through it step by step. Right, Nolan?
Yeah, that's right. When we're talking about different types of plans, you also want to, if you're energy dependent for a medical reason, or if you're in a mobile home, you can't make those decisions in 96 hours. You have to do that ahead of time. So if you're in a mobile home, know where you're going to evacuate to if you need to. If you are, do have special needs or a medical dependency to electricity, you want to register with the county's special need registry so you can get a special needs sheltering option for you when those open.
Yeah, sheltering is definitely a major consideration. I think people get a little confused when they hear, the official word is to seek safe shelter in place. Sometimes that doesn't really make sense to people. They think that they have to evacuate hundreds of miles, go to a different state, and that's certainly not always the case. And it may be, not only an inconvenience, it may be unsafe. So kind of run through some options that people might have that are a little closer to home that make sense.
Right. Well, the kind of standing rule is you want to run from water but hide from wind. So if you are in a flood zone or a low-lying area, you want to leave that area to higher ground. You don't have to go 100 miles. You don't have to go across the state. It could be, somewhere within the city or within the county even that's, a little bit more stable, a little bit higher ground. Newer construction is always a better idea. If you are in a mobile home, a lot of people stay with family and friends. Like I said earlier, it's just a better, you can make those calls now, for example, and see where you can go instead of scrambling at the last minute.
Yeah, I know a lot of the local theme parks even will make their hotels available for those seeking shelter. And it's certainly a more comfortable experience to go to a well-appointed hotel and stay there for a day or two for that than, we really discourage people from using the emergency shelters. That should be a last resort.
Exactly.
They're extraordinarily Spartan. You have to bring all of your own supplies and materials there, and they basically just give you a piece of empty floor and a cot. So, as you're thinking about this, just think, will my family be comfortable in a gymnasium or wherever for a day or two or three to ride this out? Or, could I be thinking of somewhere a little bit better appointed, now beforehand and make those arrangements? So that's certainly something important. When we're talking about sheltering with folks, I know that you hit on it. If you have seniors or those that are medically dependent on care, if you have pets, a lot of the Osceola County shelters, the emergency shelters, are pet friendly at this point. It is up to the Office of Emergency Management at the county level to decide which shelters open or don't. It's sort of it's a flexible operation that they have. It's scalable to the size of the emergency. So sometimes that creates also a little bit of uncertainty for people because it may seem like, you're waiting till the last minute to open the shelters, but it's a very big lift to get those up and running. I would ask Cameron, what could people do to prepare their property ahead of hurricane season?
Right. There's a lot that people can do. When you think about a hurricane, you think about lots of rain and lots of wind. So you want to do stuff like, clean out your gutters, pick up any debris or loose objects in your yard. You don't want something to become a projectile, get launched into your window or your neighbor's window. So anything you can do to pick up your yard. We also recommend putting up, your storm shutters if you have it, or, you could put boards up in front of your windows. We don't really recommend the duct tape X's anymore.
No, please don't.
Right. Yeah, you don't need to do that. But, if it's going to be a big wind event, certainly consider boarding up your windows.
And 3 days out is not when you start calling your tree trimmer over to put those branches out by the street, right?
Certainly. Yeah, that's everyone's going to be scrambling. You're going to have people coming from the coast, into our city at the same time. I mean, things get pretty hectic. Schools start closing. Gas runs out. I mean, this is all stuff you want to take care of as early as possible.
Yeah, because
the storm.
Everybody's trying to pick up those resources. So, Nolan, I know that you touched on the threat of floods and that we can go online and we have a website where you can actually assess your property's flood threat. Can you talk a little bit about the FEMA flood insurance?
Yes, so FEMA offers flood insurance through the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, where if you're in a flood zone, you can purchase flood insurance. It's important to note that normal homeowners insurance doesn't cover flood. So if you are flooded and you don't have flood insurance, as a homeowner, you're on your own for those costs of repairs. But through the NFIP, there's available flood insurance programs. There's also certain reductions to your costs if you're a mitigated structure. So if you're raised above base flood elevation, for example, those flood zones are categorized X through A. There's no coastal flood zone here, but it's all based on the likelihood of that parcel flooding in the year. And I do like to point out, even if you are zone X, so no flood insurance needed, that doesn't mean it's impossible to flood. It just kind of gives you a categorization of your level of risk. As you pointed out, we are kind of a lower point on the basin. We get low watershed from Orange County, from Orlando. So if they get a lot of rain, we get a lot of water, a few days later.
Yep.
It kind of all builds up. So the best place to start is on the city website. You can find your flood zone. If you don't already have flood insurance, you can get that now, as the season starts, instead of waiting maybe until the last week before landfall. That's not a great option.
I can speak from personal experience. I do not live in the city, but I also don't live in a zone where flood insurance is required. So when Hurricane Ian came through in 2022, and my home took on just a mere 2.5 to 3 inches of water, the cost out of pocket was substantial.
Right.
And my friends at my insurance company for my home said, no, it's not covered at all. So I can tell you that it's as simple to get as asking your home insurance provider for coverage. For me, it works out to be about $600 a year. That's with the deductions, and I would gladly pay it. But you do need to have it well ahead of a storm because it's not instant on.
Right. You'll need to have it before a disaster declaration.
Yep.
In order to get reimbursement or file a claim. So now's a good time to do that.
Now, as we're talking about the possibility of these storms coming in, one of the most important things, and not just because I'm a public information officer, but one of the most important things you can do is find a good, reliable source of information. What can you recommend? What are ways that people can stay abreast of, like, real, truthful information about what's coming their way?
Well, there's plenty of sources out there. One thing the city utilizes and the county emergency management is the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center. They've got a great website. They update your tracks and your wind zones and your wind speeds every couple of hours, especially as the storm ramps up closer to landfall. And that's a great source. Also, the city, once we have an emergency operations center up and running, we start issuing public notices once or twice a day, depending on the storm and the activation level. That's another great source. Have your weather radio in case there's your internet goes down or your power goes out. You can listen to the National Weather Service on the radio as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. The Weather Service, their weather alerts do tend to rely on cell service. It's a triangulation to see where you are if you're in the path of danger. But if cell service goes down, you won't get those alerts. So the weather radio is kind of an old standard in our business, but it works.
And you should definitely be prepared to have a device that's battery powered, just in case. I know we're very phone dependent. We like seeing the radar loops, and we like seeing all of that on our phone. But you have to think, after a few days without power, in the event of a major storm,
right,
what is your backup? So it's always good to have those 2 and 3 deep kind of options. Cameron, of course, hit on the fact that the city is going to work really, really hard to keep you informed. We'll be putting out things on all of the social media that we have on our website. One of the newest pieces of technology I've been using is called the Beacon app, and that's been very good, especially for folks that need their information in different languages. It translates them automatically for you. But so we're prepared. We all have our plan. We've built out our kit of supplies. We've had the storm. What do we do after the storm? What are some good post-storm things to think about? We'll start with Cameron.
Well, you don't want to run out as soon as the storm's over. And we saw this with Hurricane Ian. The storm passed, we had blue skies, and then the water levels started to rise. So the danger's not over as soon as the storm passes. You have to worry about debris in the roads. You have to worry about fallen power lines. So really you want to wait for an all clear from the city before you venture out. You can certainly go out and look around your property, but before you drive to the store or head into work, check in, make sure it's safe to drive, the winds have died down, there's no power lines.
Yeah, you'll want to keep an eye on the press releases. A lot of times after a storm, there's a lot of useful information that comes out in a very rapid succession. So if there is a point of distribution available, if sheltering has stopped and they're closed, All sorts of information happens very quickly after a storm. So make sure, however you have been monitoring for news feed or press releases, keep doing that after the storm so you get the most up-to-date information, because things change very quickly. I'd like to, my coworkers at the fire department want me to say, once it is all clear and the winds have died down, make sure you take your shutters off on board your windows. That way there's no, lingering safety hazards if there's a fire.
Yeah, I think a lot of people let their guards down. They've made it through the storm. They've made it through that Cat 1 or Cat 2, and suddenly they forget about the dangers of running a generator inside of their home. They forget about the safety steps that they need to take when they're using their chainsaw, to cut up their branches. And, they're so excited to be out and about right after the storm that they're not checking to see if there's a wire on the ground, or forget that little bit of safety about driving over water-covered streets. So Just take the time, the day off, just secure your property, make sure it's fine. One of the things that I would recommend people do post-storm is, if you have an incident to report, call it into the Citizen Information Line. If it doesn't necessarily need to be called in as 911, that's still a great way to share a concern, or if you saw a transformer pop or something like that, is a great way to report in an issue that you have that's maybe not an emergency right away.
Yeah, all that information comes back to us at the EOC, so we can prioritize it and dispatch from there. Also, that feeds directly into a damage assessment that we do as a community. So all that information is very helpful if you call into the Citizen Information Line.
I was going to say, I know the Property Appraiser's Office is one place that you can notify for that, but you can also notify the city as well. The Citizen Information Line is a great place to go to ask questions. I know a lot of people like to crowdsource their knowledge base through like the social media group chat and those things, but if you want the reliable thing, just call the source directly. That's what they're there for. I think that's a fairly comprehensive view of things, hopefully to get people thinking a little bit more about being prepared. Can we go around the room one last time if you have any final thoughts?
Sure. Don't drive through standing water. Even 6 inches can, stall out your car. 6 inches of moving water can move your car. If you're walking through it, it can knock you over. Standing water, moving water is very dangerous. Just another danger after the storm to think about.
And if you're at the edge of a canal or a deep swale, you don't see the edge of that, and you find yourself in a very bad situation really quickly.
Right.
Certainly, erosion's a big thing too. With all the rain falling, if you're standing on the edge of something, it may not be as solid as it was before the storm.
Yeah, and after heavy wind damage, there's a likelihood that there'll be down power lines. I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, but can't overstate how deadly those are. They're not always popping off the ground and making big electrical arcs. They can kind of lay pretty still until that loop gets completed, and sometimes that can really cause a lot of harm.
All right. Excellent points, all. Well, on behalf of Nolan and Cameron, this is Andrew Sullivan with the City of St. Cloud for another podcast. We want to thank you all so much for listening in, and together we can work to keep St. Cloud safe. Thanks.
That's it for this edition of Cloudcast. Don't forget to like, follow, rate, and review, and we'll see you next time on Cloudcast.